Hey, well, what's up, Colliders? We're back with everything, the craziness going on in the world. We haven't been able to be in our studio for a while. I haven't been posting new videos, but we're back. So, keep your eye open for some videos coming up. We're recording this in Star Wars week. Yesterday was May the 4th. Today is Revenge of the 5th. So, what's the point of having a YouTube channel if you can't use it to talk about Star Wars, especially on Star Wars week? And to do so, I brought in a Star Wars expert, if you will, someone that I've talked to about Star Wars for many years. My brother Mike. Hey, how you doing, brother?
Good. Hello from the west coast of Canada.
Yeah, so he's not coming at us from a galaxy far, far away, but he is coming from a different country. He's up in a church planter in Victoria area. And what would you say? We probably text each other or talk about Star Wars at least once a week, and have for as long as we've been alive, or at least as long as we've been watching the movies. So I thought we talk about Star Wars all the time. We both have a kind of a bond through Star Wars, from kids all the way to to growing up. And on this kind of Star Wars week, I thought we'd just spend some time just talking about Star Wars, kind of what we love about it. Why is it that this franchise, 40 years has just been kind of bringing delight to people still, sort of this juggernaut series. What about the story kind of, this hits home with people? And then again, also just sort of what, as Christians, what can we pull from this series? How should we navigate this? Historically, Star Wars has been kind of a controversial area for some people. So I thought we'd just sort of just talk about it, what we think about Star Wars. So maybe let you get us into it. What about Star Wars for you? We can get into kind of the bigger cultural stuff in a second, but what about Star Wars for you has made it such a, kind of a near and dear story?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think we both agree it's the classic story of that has been copied and replicated countless times before Star Wars ever came around and ever since it came. Uh, Star Wars was maybe the first one to do it in sort of a science fiction meets fantasy way. But it's the classic story of good and evil, and about you know the young apprentice desiring for more out of his life, who gets swept off into a journey and has to face obstacles. Has the mentor and then loses the mentor, and has to. It's the coming of age thing. It's the classic rescue the princess from the castle type thing. It's the rogue with the heart of gold. I mean, there's so many classic themes that just all meld together, I think, in the right way. That it's all the things that people love about stories done really well in one story. It's got
And it
some
kind of sets
Shakespearean
the
stuff. Like, there's so
yeah.
much in it that that anybody can grasp onto any one thing, but I feel like it does a bunch of things right, which is why even people who aren't into science fiction or fantasy are drawn in, because it has all the classic elements of a good fictional story.
Yeah, because it hits, and again, intentionally so. George Lucas was super inspired by, the Joseph Campbell's The Monomyth, The Hero's Journey, and the characters that he's given us in Star Wars. They so embody those sort of classic human elements that, it's years later. Star Wars has been around. You still kind of hear people be, talking about a different movie or story. That's sort of the Han Solo type, or that's the Luke Skywalker type, or that's sort of the Yoda figure in this series. Like those, I think for especially people like our age that really grew up with it, those characters, this kind of embody these sort of deep kind of primal storytelling, this kind of journey, this myth, and they do it so well. Do you remember the first time we watched? Do you remember that?
Didn't we
um
play with Lego after? But this was before actual Star Wars Lego existed, so we just had the little four dot pieces, and we took all the white ones, and those were stormtroopers, these little cubes. And we played Star Wars, and I remember Dad, actually, we skipped the second one. He
I
thought
know,
for
yeah.
some reason that we would be scared, or that we would be bored, or I don't know, but we watched four, and then we watched six, and then eventually we were like, who's Lando? And we had to go back and watch 6. So we
Yeah, and
kind
it's
of
funny because
went in
we
order.
we miss the big twist. Now we've seen the movie so many
Oh
times,
yeah.
and that moment still, that still resonates. I'm your father. But as kids, we skipped that moment, and all of a sudden they're talking about, Luke's talking to Yoda. Is Darth Vader my father? We're like, wait,
We're like,
what?
wait. Well, and for us, I think we hadn't watched many movies that weren't cartoons at that point. And so I
Yeah,
think
I
maybe
think
we've
for
seen some classic Disney family movies or something, but if that wasn't the very first movie we watched that wasn't a cartoon, it was one of the first.
yeah, and it's interesting too because I think one of the just sort of why, kind of to bridge the gap between this personal and this cultural, is this the generational? Because I think that was the first kind of live action movie that at least I did. You're maybe you being older, maybe you got some before me. I think that's the first live action movie that I ever watched was Star Wars: A New Hope. And it's actually the first one that I showed my kids. They're
Huh.
5 now. We had that day, that moment where they were probably too young for it at the time, but I have a video of my youngest son. He would have been, I guess, 3, or not youngest. They're twins, but one of their boys, and was filming them at the moment where the big Star Destroyer, the start of the movie, comes on the screen, and just to see this 3-year-old, his eyes get all big, and he just goes, big, big, big. Uh-oh.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's crazy just to think of the generational, like our parents saw that in the theaters. We missed that by, a couple of years.
I
Um,
think our parents actually went to Empire Strikes Back on their honeymoon, if I
yeah, I
remember
think they,
right. Or maybe it was Return of the, because they would have been married in 83, so maybe it was Return of the Jedi. But
yeah, I know it's one of the, and it kind of got me thinking too, as far as like, I feel like the generational aspect of Star Wars is unique because I think, I've seen people talk about that, the MCU, the Marvel movies are kind of like the Star Wars of this generation. And, there's a lot of good movies in the series, and there's a lot of fandom built around it. But I was thinking about that as, as great as some of those movies are, are my kids going to be showing their kids, hey, let's watch Ant-Man 2, or let's watch even, Infinity War, one of those movies. I don't see it the same kind of passed down. Some of like the MCU and those
no,
movies feel very much in our time, kind of a product of our time. Where, what do you think it is about
yeah,
Star Wars that it's as kind of eye-opening and delightful for like 3 generations later as it was
yeah.
first place?
So I think a couple of things. One is I think the classic trilogy was timeless because it didn't get stuck in its time. And maybe the closest comparisons you could make are like, oh yeah, you got the rebels and then the empire. It's sort of like the resistance and the Nazis back in World War II or something, but that wasn't the time that it was made. That's sort of referencing back to classic good and evil. And I think some of the problem with the new Star Wars movies is I do think many of the things that they're trying to push are stuck in our, they're trying to make statements in our cultural moment right now, but that's not how you make something timeless. If you're trying to speak to specific things, and I don't know, maybe some would argue that the original trilogy was making statements about what was going on in the world at the time, but that's not what you get when you watch it now. What you see now is these classic good versus evil themes, and like you said earlier about the characters, um, we live in a day now where movies want to make their characters so complicated. And so you've got Batman or somebody, and Batman just is by nature a complicated character, but they always have to be tortured by something in their past and all these things. And what I love about Star Wars is it just gives you the hopeful farm boy who needs to grow into maturity, like the rogue who's selfish and all about himself, who learns how to give himself to a greater cause, like the princess who has to stand up and be a leader and lead her people, and like all those sort of classic things. and I don't think the Marvel movies are going to be passed down the same way. I think maybe the Harry Potter movies will, because I think the Harry Potter movies do something. I think the Harry Potter universe is about as close to the Star Wars universe as you can get, as far as like originality and hitting on the same types of things. And you even look at the three main characters in Harry Potter, very very clear, distinct three characters, much like the three main characters of the original Star Wars trilogy. And I think for the same reasons as Star Wars has gone down as it is, I think Harry Potter will. I don't know that it will go down with as much as much as Star Wars has. I think maybe it's a little bit more limited by its genre. But who knows? I mean, we'll see. But I would say that Harry Potter is perhaps closer to what we see in Star Wars than all the Marvel stuff. And I think a lot of that is because it hits on timeless themes. And so you can watch it now with your boys, and you're not thinking, man, this is so dated from 1977. You think, hey, this is classic good versus evil. These are classic character types that we can relate to, like and so yeah, I think it'll continue to be passed down. I think the first live action movie my boys saw was like Space Buddies, with the
Oh,
little with the
yeah, well,
Airbud
I'll let
dogs.
you, whoever's watching this video, can decide who's the better father. Then, if we
I
started with
know. I think my
the
kids
deep
would
end,
have
the
nightmares.
meat. Well, Mike was still feeding the baby food, but I
But
think
they're
you're.
obsessed with Star Wars because of all the books and audiobooks and Legos, and I'm looking forward to that day where my boys can actually watch the thing that they've been obsessed with for so long.
But I think you hit on which is, I think, maybe a mistake that a lot of these series, like you brought in the Harry Potter ones, I think Star Wars is kind of the same way, where I think in some way some of the directors, the people behind it, they assume that what draws people to these stories is the universe, the world. We love this different galaxy, but it's been intriguing. With Harry Potter, there's the sequel, the Fantastic Beasts, kind of, let's revisit this magical world, and those movies just haven't hit, haven't taken off like, obviously they wanted them to. I think even like Star Wars Land um, at Universal or Disney or wherever that is, has been
Disney.
largely a bit of a bust as far as people attending it. Um, and
I
even I
plan
think so.
to remedy that
Yeah,
as
yeah.
soon as we
Well, if
can
we
get
live
there.
closer, the numbers would go up. But some of those, in trying to figure out these other kind of Star Wars stories or even comics and stuff, that it's the worlds are important. World building. I'm a big Tolkien buff guy. I love deep world building, but I think without the characters and kind of the journey of the characters, the world kind of loses its magic. And then that's been the problem with some of these later Star Wars films, some of the sequels, some of the issues that I've had with them, and then with some of these other franchises, is sort of the simplicity of these characters, their journey, kind of dealing with big things, big themes, but not in a really overly complicated, angsty way that I think we've maybe, I don't know, it's in some senses.
Yeah.
Do you feel like like the newer Star? I know that day when they announced they're making new Star Wars movies, I think I texted you right away, and we freaked out about that for a good week or so. Just what's gonna happen, and I think we'd both agree that it's been a bit of a mixed bag. There's been some good, there's been some not as good.
Yeah,
Um,
well, the world that all this stuff takes place, that's just the background. And so I mean, there's a reason why they say in photography you always want to have a person in the picture, unless you're just taking nature photography for the beauty of it. um, if you want to be compelled into a story, the background, like the playing field in which the story takes place, it's important, but it's not what's going to draw you in, right? And even some of the other Star Wars movies, I think of like the Solo movie and Rogue One. Like, I like both of those movies, but nowhere near as compelling. They got tons of aliens. I mean, Rogue One darts between about 6 different planets in the first 10 minutes.
yeah,
You know, so if that's what you want to see is like the aliens and the spaceships and stuff, that's cool. And maybe for a kid, like that's cool. And I know there was a certain allure of that at the beginning of A New Hope, when the spaceship goes. I mean, people had never really seen anything like that before. So it's like, this is amazing, the special effects. But as we know, special effects are just there to help the story, but not to drive the story. And so many movies today make that mistake of thinking if we just give incredible visual effects, it doesn't really matter so much about the characters or the weak story, and they just fall flat, which is why Solo and Rogue One, they're good movies, but they're nowhere near to the level of the originals. And I would say the same thing about the new trilogy. And I like the new trilogy. I'm not a big fan of The Last Jedi, but I like the new characters, but they're just not as compelling as the original ones. I think they could have been maybe, but they weren't. And so even though you've got better special effects, more aliens, more worlds, more technology, they don't end up being as close to that classic story of good and evil with the classic character types. And I mean, there's a
Yeah,
reason why those types are classics, you know.
yeah, it's kind of like I don't know if maybe it's becoming too overthinking it with the plot or because you think of like if we were to ask what are the main character journeys of the trinity of the original, Han, Leia, and Luke. It's pretty easy. Luke's farm boy coming from nowhere, destined for greatness. Han is gonna, thinks for himself, needs to learn to commit. You can pretty easily pinpoint it. Where
What's
if you think of,
Leia's? I've sometimes struggled to figure out what Leia's arc is, because
yeah, I
she's
think
a pretty
some,
pure character right from the get-go.
yeah, she doesn't really have a whole lot of flaws necessarily. I think just taking the leadership, taking control in some ways, and kind of a politician.
Maybe
Yeah,
trusting others too. She's sort of a take it all on herself, and then realizing a rebellion has a lot of people that need to work together to make it happen. And so she sort of trusts some of these other guys, trusts Han, and even just taking on bigger stuff. Like, she's a princess from a fairly decent planet, and now all of a sudden she leads a rebellion. Arguably, almost, you see her arc stretch all the way into the new trilogy, where she has led this great rebellion. She has, the regime change and all of that, and now she needs to pass it on to others. Kind of
yeah.
interesting
'Cause even
arc.
if you kind of like juxtapose just her, her and the Death Star getting rescued, her interactions, she's kind of a brat. Like she's a princess. She's just snarky. If you kind of put that scene against her on Endor, with Han and kind of leading and working together. Yeah, I think there definitely is an arc. But I think, you think of the sequel trilogy. It's hard to know, like, what was Finn's. You can kind of trace a few lessons he learned, or Poe. He kind of learned to not be so hot-headed, maybe to lead. You can kind of pinpoint it, but it's a little more complicated. You kind of lose some of that arc, and maybe this is a good
Well, because
transition.
of
Just
course
to,
Ray doesn't even hardly face a defeat, and that's the problem. Is she needed her Empire Strikes Back moment where she lost a hand or something, that she could grow beyond that. But she defeats Kylo Ren in the first movie, and I know a lot of other people have talked about this, but like, for her, not knowing who she was, and kind of maybe sort of similar to Luke, finding out his dark past and then growing beyond it and overcoming it. But as we've talked about, and so many others have talked about, the new trilogy is so disjointed that in so many ways the character arcs kind of get jerked around, and there's not a clear arc. It's almost responsive. It's like, okay, so here's the things that happen to them, now they need to respond to the things that happen to them, but there's not like this clear classic arc. And one thing I was thinking about the other day too, along characters, is I feel like the original trilogy respected its characters and had them there for a purpose. And you can see that in just how few characters die. And the deaths, now here's some spoiler alerts, but like the deaths in the original trilogies are so intentional. Like Obi-Wan giving his life to pass on, to the apprentice. Like, I mean, does anybody even die in The Empire Strikes Back? Like, I mean, there's a few no-name officers that Darth Vader kills, but other than that, like, you don't lose any main characters. And then Return of the Jedi, you have some natural deaths, right? You have Yoda, who's just passing on. You've got Darth Vader and the Emperor, who, of course, they're going to die. It's the end of the trilogy. Like, there needs to be that resolution. But I mean, the whole trilogy, you have just a handful of deaths of main characters. Well, in the new trilogy, like, you kill off, right, a main character right off the bat in the first one. And then in the second one, Ryan Johnson kills off like all these characters. He kills off, most of the bad guys and all these, just sort of takes them all out. And then you got a bunch more deaths in the third one, as it all, you see this resolution. And I feel like the original trilogy didn't waste characters. If it had a character, even a side character, they served a very clear purpose. And I think in the new trilogy, one of the things they got wrong was, rather than focusing on the your clear protagonists like the original one did, and this is what the Harry Potter ones do too. The story is clearly about the three protagonists. Instead, you're wasting time with all these other characters that you're just gonna kill off, and they serve, like Phasma, the biggest wasted opportunity ever. You just kill her off, and she served no opportunity. Like, she served no purpose, right? Because you don't, and it's just like, why throw in all these characters that take away from focusing on the main characters? And that's part of why I think the original trilogy, um, it's classic, is it got that right. It said, these are our three protagonists, and this is a story about them. And there's some fascinating side characters. They're going to have help along the way, but it's not about those characters. It's about these three. And I think that's what the new
One or two, some
trilogy
of
messed
the
up.
because a lot of people talk about, perhaps the greatest plot twist of all time is the Vader reveal. You know, but when you think of the original trilogy, though, it's not a movie that's just throwing surprises. It's not trying to subvert all these expectations. There are some, and I guess it's hard for us to. We're so familiar with those movies that maybe it's hard for us to go back and remember how much we expected, or but it was really wasn't about just sort of surprising you or catching you off guard. Or they'll never see this coming. That's why I think even the Vader reveal, even when you've known that reveal for years, for decades, it doesn't lose any of its impact because it so affects the story going forward. It's so kind of central to Luke and to Vader slash Anakin
And I
that it's
think
not
that's
really
why
a
it hits, is you care so much about Luke, right? Like, you never care about Ray the same way that you care about Luke in the originals. And so you feel it for him. It's a shock, but it's a shock because it's a personal, emotional thing where you're like, this poor kid, after all he's been through, and after Vader just beats him down, and then he drops this knowledge on him, like, this is your legacy, this is your past. And it's emotional. It's not just a twist, like a, oh wow, I didn't see that coming. It's like an emotional, gut-wrenching thing.
and yeah, and then it kind of from that point on, that the entire story is narrative is impacted. Where you compare that to, I think we live now in a time where it's a lot more. There has to be a shocking death. There has to be subvert expectations. I think Ryan Johnson gets a lot of the blunt of that, but I think even JJ with the new ones, I think it's just sort of our, or even outside of the Star Wars franchise, there's you need that shocking big moment. But the problem with that, if you compare the Vader reveal to like Snoke getting cut in half, like seeing that in theaters the first time was like, whoa, like did they actually just get Snoke? But watching it for like the third or fourth time, it doesn't have much impact because it's not central really to the story. In some ways it is to Ben Solo, but a lot of those, they're almost like jump scares where it's
Yeah.
what they happen, they kind of catch you off guard, like, oh, did they really do that?
Once you
But
know it's
once you know
coming.
it, then it's just they're trying to surprise you so much rather than just sort of invest in in these deeper themes. And I guess what's we probably should touch on before we're done.
Well, because it
um
makes sense that Ryan Johnson's next movie was Knives Out, which was like a murder mystery with a bunch of gotcha moments, because that's what he loves to do. but that's not what that doesn't feel like what the Empire Strikes Back was. Like it has this big reveal because it totally just ups all the stakes and sets it up perfectly for Return of the Jedi. Like Return of the Jedi, Luke needs to face not just the evil guy, and that's the problem with the MCU movies is they can't get the villains right. Right? Like the villains are all just throwaway villains until you get to Thanos, and even then it's like okay, they're facing him, but he's just the bad guy that they have to defeat, right? But with Vader, it's like okay, so Empire or Return of the Jedi has a very clear objective. Like Luke needs to face his Vader, but it's personal. He doesn't want to just go in there and kill him. Like, and so talk about upping the stakes. You're facing your greatest enemy, your greatest threat. This guy needs to be stopped, but at the same time, it's your father, and you don't want to go in there and kill him. And so, like, man, talk about when Luke walks into the throne room with the Emperor, you feel all of those stakes because you're like he doesn't want to kill his father. Like it's this personal thing, not just okay, here's the big, and all the MCU movies are like here's the big showdown against the villain at the end, and you know the villain's going to die, but there's no real emotional payoff to it. I mean, some of them maybe a little bit, but most of the MCU movies, they kill the bad guy at the end, and you're like, yeah, of course they did. They saved the world. Big laser beam, portal in the sky, aliens. You know, half of the movies end that way. It's just not nearly as emotional or involving.
Yeah, I want to get we can spend a few minutes as sort of maybe some of the as Christians. What are some of the themes? We've gotten into some of it, I think. But real quick, let's just get best. Maybe I guess I was gonna say the top three, but I'm sure that's just the original trilogy in a certain order. But we won't go through all the rankings, maybe. But maybe of best overall, and then maybe best your favorite of the newer
Of each
ones.
trilogy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I think Empire Strikes Back is probably a better movie. It's just overall, I think it's just a better movie. But my personal favorite was always Return of the Jedi. I think it's fun. I love all the emotional payoff at the end. I don't think you can get any better of a resolution than Vader and Luke. Um, you know, I know with the new trilogy they had to sort of continue that storyline, but I don't think you can beat the ending of Return of the Jedi. Like, I think as far as enjoyableness, that one has always been my favorite. Um, I hate all the prequels. I know some people argue that Revenge of the Sith is actually a really good movie. Uh, I guess if you're watching it for like as a Shakespearean tragedy, it is. But I don't like Shakespearean tragedies. Like, and so to me, there's no payoff. It's the whole prequel trilogy is all just setup, and that's why prequel trilogies typically aren't any good. Is because it's not the actual story that you're interested in. It's just giving. It's like reading a history book. You're sort of like, this is interesting, but it's not nearly as interesting as like or relevant as like what's happening right now, or like the actual story that's unfolding or whatever. And then with the new ones, um, I think I think The Force Awakens, because of the novelty of introducing these new characters, I think they did a great job at that. I think Han Solo carries that movie as well. I like the new characters, but Han Solo just carries it. Um, the more as time has passed, I've disliked The Last Jedi more and more. I hate all the political statements that it tries to push rather than just being a good story. You know, I there's so much that I don't like about The Last Jedi, although some of the standalone, I think it has some of the best standalone scenes. I think there's some really
Yeah, like
great
Yoda Luke
individual.
is just classic.
Yoda and
Like
Luke is
classic
great. I
Star
mean,
Wars.
there's some, you know, the throne room fight is sweet. Like there's some good stuff in it, but it's not one that I go back to watch. And I actually, the more time that passes, the more I enjoy the Rise of Skywalker for what it is. You know, there's some things that aren't so good in it, but I think it's fun. I think it moves pretty quick, and I think there's some good emotional payoff in that as well. I think the heart of the story has always been Rey and Kylo's relationship, and so you know, I like how all of that plays out in the end.
Yes, I think we fall. I think maybe in some of the middle stuff we have different orders, I think we land pretty similar with the because those are my, I've always been a Return of the Jedi is the greatest. It's the
I'm
original
fine with the
trilogy.
Ewoks too. I like the fact
Yeah,
that this huge empire with all their technology and all their weapons gets taken out by these primitive teddy bears. I think it's a neat statement of what the rebellion was. It was little alien worlds like the Ewoks rising up to defeat this great empire. And so yeah, they're cuddly and cute, but I think it actually makes a pretty sweet story.
yeah, and they get so much flack for the Empire was overthrown, which the Ewoks weren't piloting into the Death Star. They weren't
Yeah.
Wicket wasn't taking on Palpatine. All they had to do was blow up one building, and they helping the rebels. So I think, but for me, Star Wars has always been not like a spoofy. I don't want to get into that silly, but it's just a goofy adventure kind of Saturday morning cartoon. Like that's why I love Force Awakens. To me, it was just it's just fun. It's maybe not as deep as some of the Star Wars movies. Return of the Jedi to me is just the most fun. That last about the last third of that movie, the intercut three kind of battle on three fronts. I don't
Yeah.
think has been matched in a movie since
The
Star Wars
speeder
movie
bike
maybe.
chase is so exciting, and then the emotional stakes that are happening on the Death Star, and then the fighting in the forests, and then you by the time you get there, you forget that the whole first part of the movie took place, at Jabba the Hutt and all of his gangsters and the big mouth. I hate the changes they made with Return of the Jedi. I know we sort of disagree on this, but I hate that they turned the Sarlacc into a Venus
Venus
flytrap.
flytrap.
It's not scary at all. What's scarier than a giant mouthful of teeth that you're just falling into? You have no idea what it even is, or what does the Sarlacc look like beneath the surface? Nobody knows. Instead, you have this dumb,
Well, you if
bad
you
special
played
effects.
the Super NES, Super Nintendo Return of the Jedi, you know what the Sarlacc looked like, which was terrifying. We're
Yeah,
almost out of time, so let's just kind of as what are some we've touched on it again. I touched on some of these basic, but maybe get your thoughts on. I know sometimes as Christians might get kind of turned off or hesitant or just unsure. They look at it and they see kind of the mysticism of side of it. They see the force, and you know, there's kind of two ways you can take that. You can either just turn that, as many of preachers have, into just a clear kind of almost allegory to the Bible and the force and the Holy Spirit and all that, or else you can kind of see it as like it's just something that we need to be wary of as Christians. What do you think? What would you kind of say to that as far as as Christians, what can we kind of dig into in this? Should we be wary of the force and the mystical side, or is there more to it that we can kind of take from it?
yeah. Like I think there's clear, like Eastern philosophy teaching. We're all connected. This life force connects everybody, and you know, uh, if you go too far down that road, obviously it can be a problem. But there's still some good lessons to be learned in that. Like yeah, we should treat each other well because we're sort of connected and that sort of thing. But there's also, yeah, I think ultimately it's not biblical. The biblical thing is, hey, I don't have what it takes within myself, and so I need to trust something, not something, but someone beyond who I am. There's I can't just sort of find it within myself to become what I need to be. I need help. I need God to reach down to me. And so ultimately, I don't think you see a lot of just the clear gospel in Star Wars, maybe the way that you would more in like a Lord of the Rings or something. But also as a preacher, I've used countless illustrations from Star Wars. You think of so many different truths, like don't let the sun go down on your anger, don't give the devil a foothold. You think of Luke fighting Vader at the end of Return of the Jedi, and that scene where he's beating down on Vader, chops his hand off, and then the Emperor is laughing in the background, and Luke looks at his hand. He realizes his anger is leading him to become the very thing that he hates, the very evil he's trying to defeat. And the devil getting a foothold, you have the Emperor standing in the background laughing as he sees this Luke devolve into what he's trying to defeat. And so, like, you see themes like that, you see, like redemption, that nobody is beyond, um repentance. You see Darth Vader uh, turning and repenting, and I mean, so I think there's a lot of clear biblical themes, even if the philosophy of the Force itself is not really gospel centered. So I would say probably the spirituality in Star Wars is not biblical, but the human themes that you see are. And so you can definitely make the case that you see a lot of biblical imagery happening, even if it's sort of like Harry Potter. You could find biblical imagery there too, even if the idea of magic is not necessarily a biblical thing that we should grasp onto. And so I think there's lots of good in it, and then ultimately it's a story of redemption, which I think is very biblical. And so, like, the Force to me is just sort of part of that world. um but that's not why you go to Star Wars. You go to Star Wars for the human drama and the story, and I think you see a lot of biblical crossover in the human story.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where we've been hitting this whole talk, is the world and stuff, and some of that's definitely a part, and a huge part of Star Wars. But I think the reason these movies have just been so timeless, or at least we know the original trilogy has been so timeless, is that it goes beyond the world and some of that, the Force itself, and this does, you think of kind of Luke and his, for me, his big scenes of, like in A New Hope, him standing and kind of looking at his burnt farm, realizing it's time for him to join in Empire Strikes Back. You could have, him facing the cave or his failure. And then the scene you talked about where, he throws his lightsaber and he's not going to kill Vader. I am a Jedi now. Some of those themes, you could take out all the Force stuff, all the mystical stuff, and those are human themes that we can wrestle with. And this the cave on Dagobah is, there's so much to that I think you can relate to, kind of regardless of what your worldview is or what the worldview that Lucas had making it. And I think that's why I get, again, I respect if you're someone, if someone feels like that they just aren't comfortable with it. There's lots of, I think you're missing out on some great movies, but there are a lot of other movies to watch. And I don't think, you're not a terrible person to not watch these movies, but I think there's definitely, if you can just sort of get past some of the world stuff, kind of the surface level, I think there's so much in these movies that are just so human. And that's why, even as our culture has changed and decades have gone by, those same struggles continue to resonate, because they're not based in time or in one situation, and they're not social commentary. They're kind of more human, kind of human commentary. But maybe kind of as final thoughts, we're about out of time for this. Um, we didn't get into some of the stuff, like TV now. We got The Mandalorian. We got Star Wars is definitely changing. I don't know if how you feel like we're sort of at the point where I'm excited about what's coming, but I also know you can never go back to the freshness of those original three movies. Who knows? Maybe our kids, we have kids the same age. Maybe they'll grow up and they'll just they'll look back at Ray and Finn and Poe the same way we do. Who knows? I feel like every generation thinks that their generation had the good ones. But what are your sort of your thoughts now with where we are in Star Wars, and kind of maybe what are you looking for kind of in the future with this series?
Yeah, it's, I think in a lot of ways Star Wars is riding the wave of nostalgia. And so, obviously the original trilogy is what put all this stuff on the map, and so it doesn't really seem like anything they do now, especially with all the books and all the shows and all the stuff, it's going to be really hard to come out with new stuff that has the same sort of uh uh, revelation to people as when they first experienced it, because before Star Wars there wasn't really anything quite like that. And so it was so novel that everybody was like, wow, I've never seen anything like this. We've seen so much now that it's really hard to, which is why, it's going to come down to a good story. Which is, it can't just be about the special effects and whatever else. Like, it has to be a good story to have the lasting impact. I think people like us who are into Star Wars are going to love things like The Mandalorian. You know, we can find the Easter eggs in there. It's cool to see some of the same stuff, that sort of to see the other side, what's happening in the universe outside of this main storyline of Star Wars. And so that kind of stuff is cool. And I think we'll eat that stuff up. I watched went back and rewatched several of the Mandalorian episodes last night, and they're good. Like, it's a good, it's well made. It's interesting, but nothing's going to ever touch the classics. And a lot of that is nostalgia. And so it might just be that whatever first introduces you to it is what you hold on to. And so, yeah, for our kids, you know, maybe it's the newer ones. I mean, your kids started with the old ones, you know. I don't know
Oh
how.
yeah.
That's probably what we'll do with ours as well. But and so it might just be whatever is first introduced to you is what has that impact. I mean, that's psychological, right? Like, your memory. I'm reading a book right now called The Organized Mind. Talks about that like things that are out of the ordinary, like things that stick in your mind and stick in your memory, are the things that stand out for a reason, right? They have emotional impact for you, or they're just different than all the other things. So you don't remember what you had for breakfast 3 days ago because you have breakfast every single day, and it's typically the same stuff. But you would remember if you had a really unique emotional experience for breakfast a few days ago. That will stick in your mind. And I think it's the same thing with these movies. It's the emotional impact it makes on you, um, that makes it, that drives nostalgia. And so it'd be interesting to see our kids' generation, what is nostalgic for them when they're our age. What are they going to look back on? And you know, it maybe they'll borrow some of the nostalgia of our generation. Just like, I mean, Star Wars, we weren't alive. Like, we weren't even born yet by the time Return of the Jedi came out. And so we're sort of borrowing the nostalgia of the generations before us, because it was introduced to us in a similar way as it was introduced to them. It was mind blowing for us. And so who knows this next generation, but I definitely think they're going to keep making Star Wars stuff as long as there's money to be made. And there's definitely money, and I will continue to give them my money as long as
Yeah.
they keep making good Star Wars stuff.
Yeah, and I think in my review, I think I wrote it for the Rise of Skywalker. I kind of end where, in the movie they talk a lot about, it's a feeling. The Force is like, it's a feeling, it's an instinct. That's sort of been my barometer for just, I don't necessarily go into Star Wars movies super objective and I'm a critic. I just sort of take them in as it's sort of an experience, and it's just that feeling of Star Wars for me that I think has kind of been lost a bit. Just sort of that fun, simple adventure, kind of a whole new world, possibilities. That's sort of what I'm hoping for going. Who knows where the possibilities are endless for, it's on TV now. They're gonna keep making more movies. But just sort of hoping they kind of recapture some of that. They might not capture the magic or the newness like they did back in the day, but just some of that fun, some of that just sort of, simple fantasy, goofy knights saving a princess in a big round castle from a dark knight kind of thing. If they can kind of capture some of that, I think, I'll be satisfied with what they're doing. No, even knowing that it's not going to replace the originals. But hey, I think we're out of time. It's been fun to, we talk about Star Wars all the time, anyways. I was like, hey, let's just turn a camera on and talk about it. If you guys are watching this video, if you guys are still with us, we'd love to just hear, what are your thoughts on Star Wars? What about this series kind of draws you into it? Are you still loving it? Have you been turned off by some of the surrounding cultural divide over these movies? Is Star Wars still fun to you? Does it still feel like Star Wars? I was talking to someone on our Collision Facebook page about this, ready for a new thing. We're ready to branch out from what we've had. I don't know. Is that you? You guys feel that way? We'd love for you guys to let us know in the comment section. If you haven't done so, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, we'd love for you to do that. Join with that, all the other stuff we're doing. But hey, thanks, Mike. Thanks for. We'll definitely
Yeah.
try and get you on again. Call you in. If there's another, whether it's Star Wars or some other topic that we want to, maybe when like the new Mandalorian season comes on, maybe we'll call you in and kind of break some of that down. But yeah, take care up in Canada. Stay safe with everything going on, and then I guess may the Force be with you.
I was going to say, and with you.
Always. Thank you.